Hi, my name is Kristin and this is Kristin Kraves Books. So it is Thursday, February 16th, and this is the day that 72 Hours in the Haunted House starts, and I'm so excited about this. I've been reading a lot of romance because it is February after all, but I am ready to get into some darker stuff. There are two wheels for this readathon. There is a thriller wheel where you get different prompts and a horror wheel, and I'll definitely be staying on the horror wheel. We can really get into this in a different video, but I'm just not a thriller person anymore. I just don't think that thrillers work for me anymore, but horror really does, and I'm really excited to just stay on that wheel and have a good time. The readathon doesn't start until 7 tonight, but I want to film this intro ahead of time, spin the wheel, choose a book, so right at 7 when the sprint starts, I'm ready to go, and I actually just finished my book this morning, so I'm not in the middle of anything right now, and I am so prepared for this. So I'm gonna pull up the wheel, I'm gonna screen record this, hopefully that works out, and then I will look through and see what book I'm gonna read. I'm trying to read Darcy Coates for this readathon as much as I can because the hosts of this readathon all love Darcy Coates, so I just thought that was appropriate. I also think they all love Mira Grant, so I'm gonna try and get some Mira Grant on here, and we'll see what else I can come up with. But between Kindle Unlimited and Scribd, I have a lot of options. So let me pull up the wheel. The only one that I'm worried about getting here is Cosmic, because I can't wrap my head around what cosmic horror is, and the only one that I do have that I do need to read that is cosmic horror, it's A Song for the Void for Spiffbo, but that's too long and I don't think it's appropriate for a 72-hour readathon, so let's hope we don't get cosmic. Let me go for it. And we got psychological, which I feel like is very broad. I think a lot of horror could be considered psychological, so I feel like I'm safe choosing pretty much anything here, but I'm gonna go look through what I have saved and get some recommendations maybe from the Discord chat, and I will let you know at 7 o'clock the book that I've chosen. I'm already failing at this, and I didn't vlog last night. I'm so bad about vlogging at nighttime, but I will try to be better. I did manage to read a book last night. Fever Dream. I gotta pull up the author. I am trying to read more translated fiction this year, and this one was translated, so let me pull this up. See, I'm not very prepared. So this is by Samatha Schweblin, and it is translated by Megan McDowell and Ruth Sepp, and this author I've seen around. She has a few other horror books that look interesting to me. Little Eyes is one. Is it Mouthful of Birds? I think that's a collection of short stories. But Fever Dream, I was so curious about how a book with a horse on the cover is horror, and this is definitely horror. And I would say this is psychological because that was my prompt. And I feel like psychological is such a broad term that I was struggling to find something. Saw this was available on audio from my library, grabbed it, listened to it in one sitting, and this is very aptly named. This was like a fever dream. I think this entire thing is dialogue. I'd be interested to see what a physical copy of this book looks like. From what I can tell in the audio, I wonder if it's like almost written like a play, because it was just a conversation between these characters, and it's about a woman in a hospital bed and then this young boy, and he is asking her to recount what happened to her that landed her in the hospital, and he keeps telling her that she's focusing on the wrong parts of the story, and you know something's not right here, and it's slowly revealed but not really. I don't think that you should read this if you want answers to what's going on here, because we don't get those, which was really disappointing. And I feel like this is a story that kind of needed that, because that's kind of what you hold on to in this story, is how did she end up here? What's really going on? Is everything we're being told true? It's all left up to your own interpretation, but not in a way that worked for me, because I don't mind open endings, especially in horror. I think sometimes open endings make sense, but I don't know if that was true in this case. But I did like the writing. This was thoroughly creepy. It gave me weird dreams, so you always know that that is a successful horror in my mind. I probably never would have got to this without this readathon, so that is nice, because I do want to try other books by her, maybe even this weekend. Nice to read something translated. It's translated from Spanish into English, so I'm curious to see her other books. If you've read this, let me know. Fever Dream is just the perfect name for this, because it's one of those books, it's so short, you can't really talk about it. I think you just kind of have to accept it for what it is, and what it is a fever dream, and there is a horse in it. So see if you enjoy that one. I thought that was interesting. And so now I have to spin the wheel and know what else I'm going to be reading today. I know that I said I wanted to get Mira Grant and Darcy Coates, but I couldn't find anything that I would call psychological from them. So we will see how this goes now. Okay, you probably can't see this. I didn't screen record it, but I will insert it here. I got sci-fi horror, which is perfect because I know exactly the book that I want to read for sci-fi horror, and that is a Mira Grant book. So this is working out. Mira Grant is obviously Shannon McGuire, but she writes her horror under Mira Grant's pen name, and she has a lot of sci-fi horror, which is interesting. And I do like sci-fi horror. I know Dead Silence was popular last year. I like that. I like sci-fi, I like horror when I like them together. And she has one called Final Girls, which not the Riley Sanger Final Girls. This is by her, Mira Grant. And this is a shorter book as well, which is perfect for a readathon. I love this cover. I think this cover is so haunting. And it is supposedly about using virtual reality for therapeutic purposes. So you go under this virtual reality experiment, and it's like a nightmare, and it's supposed to help repair your relationships. I think like siblings go under together who don't talk anymore, and that like makes their bond better because they survive this terrible nightmare and they come out stronger in the end, and they realize how much they love each other, kind of things. And I'm sure it all goes wrong, and this lighting is just getting worse and worse. So I will probably get through that pretty quickly. I also have that on audio, so it's on Script, which is awesome. Script has a lot of Mira Grant stuff, so I'm really excited about this, and super not spooky. I know that this is a 72-hour in the haunted house. I'm wearing a pink shirt, this bright sun with sunflowers. I know that Cassidy has a fort and everything. I'm just sitting here in this chair. You'll probably see this chair a lot because this is where I like to read, but I have some other stuff to do. I'm sure I'll get through this one pretty quickly. There's some sprints happening now, which is fun, so I'll catch up with you in a second. I told you you'd see me sitting here a lot, but I just finished Final Girls by Mira Grant, and that was my first experience with Mira Grant. I'll definitely read more from her. It was 112 pages, so it's hard to get like a full story arc in that time, but I feel like I was satisfied with what we had. I think I said in the last clip that it's about virtual reality and creating nightmares through therapy, and that's really what it is. But it almost felt like an episode of Black Mirror, and with the nature of that, it's like you can't say too much because the shock factor is what makes it memorable, and it reminds me of another book where that happened that I can't even tell you that book because it would spoil that book for you and this book, so I don't want to say. But there's like a twist that happens that makes it a little bit more compelling. But the entire idea is so interesting, and if you're looking for sci-fi horror, I think this is a good one because it doesn't get bogged down in the science at all, because it's more about therapy and psychology. And then virtual reality, I think we all have an understanding of, and how those two things can be used for treatment, like how a nightmare scenario could bring people who were so far apart closer together and feel more protective of each other. It's an interesting discussion. And then the ethics of all that, like playing with people's minds in that way, is that effective? We're following a woman who's actually a journalist, and you learn about her thoughts about this process and why she would be against it based on something that happens in her past, and then she ends up in one of these scenarios, and we see how that all plays out for her. And it was really, really interesting. I would give this 4 stars. I liked it more than Fever Dream, I think, because I just think there are more interesting concepts to chew on, and that's something that I like in my horror. I like when it leaves you thinking about it afterwards, and I think a lot of horror does that. I actually think Fever Dream does that as well, just in a different way. And actually I went back and read some articles about Fever Dream, and it talks about some interesting things that inspired the author, particularly pesticides usage in Argentina, and how that gets into the water supply and then the birth defects that can happen from that. So I think that's an interesting article to read. I will leave that linked down below. If you have read Fever Dream or you're interested, I think learning about the inspiration makes the whole thing make more sense. But back to Final Girls, I had a good time with this. I think it's a good way to get introduced to this author's writing. I think it's a good way to get introduced to sci-fi horror in general. It's a good reminder of why I like horror, why I like sci-fi. So I'm happy I read that. Again, not one I think I would ever got to if it weren't for this readathon, which is why I love doing these readathons so much. And I'm gonna pull out the horror wheel again. As you can see, I'm just staying on horror. I have no interest in thrillers at the moment. Let me do this. Okay, I got Haunted House, which is perfect. I was hoping for Haunted House or Gothic, something that I could, or Spooky Word. I feel like those three I could have made a Darcy Coates book work, but I think Darcy Coates is really known for haunted house stories, so this is perfect. I'm going to do Gallows Hill because I had that on Audible. It was an Audible daily deal not that long ago. So I have that. It's on the longer side, so I'm not going to get through it quite as quickly as I did the first two, but I like that. I like to start a readathon off with a couple short novellas to really get me motivated and feel accomplished, and then I can go into something a little longer. I think it's like 300 and something pages, 370 something pages, and it's following a woman whose parents pass away and they leave her their winery and the house and everything, and I think it's haunted, and she had no relationship with her parents and she's just learning things about them through this house and after their death, and in this town where she hasn't been in many, many years and she has no memories of. So I think this could be really good. I know all the co-hosts of this readathon adore Darcy Coates. I know they adore Mira Grant too. So it just makes it more fun for me. So I'm gonna go back to the sprints. I think this sprint is over in 2 minutes, and we'll see how far I can get into Gallows Hill. It is Saturday and I have a couple hours left in the audiobook of Gallows Hill, and I just wanted to talk about it before I get to the ending. I've heard the ending is really amazing and I hope that it is, because sadly I'm having mixed feelings about this one. I typically love haunted house stories and like this gothic vibe, super atmospheric, but I think I've kind of been spoiled with C.J. Cook, so my standards of atmosphere are quite high because I just know what I like. And the thing with haunted house stories is that often the main character is super frustrating because they kind of have to be to get themselves into these ridiculous and scary situations over and over and over again, not ask questions, not get help, all that kind of stuff. So they can be stressful to read about and infuriating, and that's what's happening to me with Margot. I really like the setup of this. I like that it's a wine cellar, winery. I like that we have some other side characters on the property as well. I have an idea of where this is going, but I don't want to say. I have a prediction for the ending, but I feel like I'm right, so I'm not going to say anything. But yeah, I don't know. It's just not my favorite, and I'm wondering if part of it is it's too long. That maybe I just prefer my horror to be under 300 pages, because that's typically the kind of horror that I read are closer to being novellas. And I know that Darcy Coates has some shorter books that maybe I will try, because I'm just wondering if this is too slow burn for me, because I would definitely call this a slow burn horror. If maybe it's too repetitive, too many scenes of her getting spooked in the night, and it just seems to be happening over and over again, and if it's just too tedious for me and just not my thing, because a lot of people love this, and I think part of this too is my expectations for were really, really high. And I'm definitely not going to write off Darcy Coates. I don't think this is a bad book at all. I think I am excited to see the ending, because I've heard the ending's fantastic, but just not a real winner. I really thought this would be 5 stars, and I'm leaning towards a 3 at this very moment, which kind of makes me sad. But if you have read Gallows Hill and are a huge Darcy Coates fan, what is one of her shorter books that you think I might like? Because I think her storytelling in a more concise fashion will probably be better for me. It's just, I think that's what I like in horror. So we will see. You never know, the ending could turn this around for me, and I'm excited to spin the wheel and move on to my next book. Okay, so I finished it, and I will say the ending is fantastic. I did see some of it coming, but I thought she did a great job with it. It's kind of gross, and if you read it, you know I think that the ending was worth it. So I think I'm gonna give this a 3.5. I think that the ending bump this up 0.5 because I think I will think and stew on that ending for a long time. But all the other stuff still stands. I did find Margot a frustrating character, but as I said, in horror, that's typically the case with something like this. And it was too long. It was too slow burn for me, and it was not quite as atmospheric as I like, which is not to say it wasn't atmospheric, because it was. Like a haunted winery, that's interesting. It just was repetitive in its atmosphere, if that makes any sense. But I will try Darcy Coates again. I'm not sure if I will do that in this reading vlog this weekend, because I want your recommendations for where to go from here. And there are a few other books I want to try to get to. I would love to get to A Dowry of Blood this weekend, so I'm hoping I get Gothic. There's another haunted house one that I want to read. It's like a YA one that just came out that's on Kindle Unlimited. I think it's called Heart Havoc Haunt. Those 3 words are in the title, I just don't know the right order. So let me spin the wheel, and if I don't get one of those things, I will probably use one of my respins, because those are the ones that I'm in the mood for right now, and we are allowed 3 respins, I believe. Oh well. I got, can you see that? Will that focus for you? I keep forgetting to screen record, but I got Gothic, so I guess I will read A Dowry of Blood. So that is exciting, because I've been wanting to read A Dowry of Blood for ages. Let me grab my copy, 1 second. I have this gorgeous Fairy Loot edition. Look how pretty this is. I think people who don't even like this kind of thing love this. I have not seen a terrible review for Dowry of Blood, and I can go for a book that's like just vibes. I finally read Dracula a couple years ago, loved it. I love the idea of following Dracula's first bride and then the romance that she has with some of the other brides. I think this is a letter to Dracula, but he is never named in it, which I appreciate. I think her getting her voice back is amazing. And I just want to show you the dust jacket of this. How cool is this? If this does not scream Gothic vibes, I don't know what does. And I'm guessing that's Dracula. And then there you go. So other than that basic synopsis, I know nothing about this other than that the writing is supposed to be really beautiful. And I think it's awesome that it says in here, A Dowry of Blood contains depictions of emotional, verbal, and physical intimate partner abuse, gaslighting, war, famine, and plague, blood and gore, consensual sexual content, sadomasochism, self-harm, body horror, violence and murder, alcohol use, depression, and mania. It also contains brief references to sexual assault not directed at any named characters, drug use, and drowning. So you can be prepared for those things in here. And I just love everything about the setup of this book. And it's just, I think this is going to be exactly what I'm in the mood for. And I'm so glad that I managed to fit this on my TBR. This was the one book that I really wanted to get to this weekend. So that makes me really excited. So I'm vlogging my phone, so if the quality is different, I apologize. I just can't be bothered. I'm exhausted. I'm burnt out. I never want to read another horror book again. But I think that always happens to me in readathons. And even though I finished this last night and I absolutely adored it, it is 5 stars. There are so many quotable moments on here. I will share them in my story. I shared one already. I just think that this is the most beautiful book. And a lot of the times I would think flowery writing can just be showy and not meaningful, but in this case I think that it has a lot of depth. Every word is perfectly chosen. I think that the writing fits the tone of the story. You think of Dracula, you think it's going to have a certain tone to it, some level of pretension that just works. I would get some of these quotes tattooed on me. I'm serious, and I don't have any tattoos, but I'm tempted to get another copy of this, like a traditional copy, not this Fairy Loot. Of course, I'm going to keep this Fairy Loot. It's one of the most beautiful books I own, but I need to reread this and annotate it. And you can't do that with this, because why would you want to read ruin such a pretty book? I can't even talk. I'm exhausted. But I love this. What can you even say about this that hasn't been said a million gazillion times? I think that this really gives Dracula's brides a voice. And this is the kind of thing that I like when classics are being retold. I like to hear from the women and the side characters in a classic to see their outlook on things. I think this was brilliant. I loved that it was written like a letter to Dracula. She kind of says it's like my last love letter to you, but she never says his name, which is awesome and powerful on its own. We learn how her name's Costanza and she was his first bride, and how she was turned into a vampire, how deeply she loved him, but she realizes that that love was probably toxic and not true love, and everything that comes from that, and not spending any time apart, and the desperation that she had for him and how he took advantage of that, and then him bringing new wives into the picture and her relationships with them. And then, oh, I don't want to spoil anything more, but I just thought this was brilliant. 5 stars. Potentially one of my best books of the year. I think this is one that's going to grow on me, and I will appreciate more on a reread. I don't know what's happening to me. I'm becoming a rereader, so that's a change for 2023, but that's awesome. And I'm so happy that I have this gorgeous edition of one of my favorite books. I'm tempted to try and figure out a way to put this on my shelves so that it's forward facing. Because it's just so pretty and I just love it so much. So I'll see if I can arrange that. But I finished this late last night, and of course I had to spin the wheel again because I love spinning the wheel. And I got Supernatural, and I thought, oh no, not another ghost story. But then I remembered that Hannah from Hannah Blackwell recommended, I was on live streams with her not that long ago, and she recommended When the Reckoning Comes, and that the audiobook is on Scribd, and I started it and I'm loving it. It is set in the South, and it is following these 2 women who were friends when they were younger, and they haven't spoken in many years, but one of them is getting married and wants her friend to be there. And the wedding just happens to be taking place on an old plantation where they used to go when they were kids, and I think something horrible happened there when they were children, and we're learning more about that. And now, as they're adults, going back for this wedding, I think that more stuff's going to go down. I think that we are going to get some really good hauntings in here. It is about the slaves from this plantation getting their revenge. So I've heard incredible things after Hannah recommended it. I looked up all these reviews, and people seem to really, really like it. I really am enjoying the audiobook. I'm enjoying the writing. And speaking of audiobooks, I immersion read this, which I really liked, except I will say that the audiobook is for the self-published version. So there are subtle differences. It's nothing crazy. It's just words here or there. So it was interesting to notice. I wonder if they'll redo the audiobook, but the audiobook really is good. So yeah. Oh my god, my hand. So yes, that is the plan. I think When the Reckoning Comes will probably be my last book, and I might not even finish it today. I will, if I finish it tomorrow after the readathon, I'll still come on and update you on what my thoughts on it. But I think that's pretty good. 4 books so far, started a 5th. Can't complain. Just never want to read another horror for a long, long time. I need some romance in my life. So it is actually Monday, and the readathon is over, but I want to finish When the Reckoning Comes for this vlog because I want to talk about it, put on your radar. I have 2 hours left of the audiobook, and the audiobook narration is fantastic. But I want to get a physical copy for my shelves because I think this is going to be a new favorite. It's one that I probably want to reread and annotate and reference a lot, so I would love to have a copy for my shelves. It is classified as horror on Goodreads, and I think it's horror in that humans do horrific things and that humanity can be horrifying. I think that's where the horror leans, and there are hints of supernatural things happening, but we're just getting glimpses of that. I don't know if it's true supernatural or not. You know how that tends to be the case and things like that. I'm not sure where that is leading. It's so much tension, and we're really building up to it. Our main character is seeing things, but she's not sure what they mean yet, and it just got to a part where she's discussing her visions with another character who is seeing things and kind of explaining what he's been going through to her. So I think it's really building up to something, so that's why I want to stop here, because I think now we're going to get into the more horror stuff in this last 30%, but I appreciated the slow burn in this case. I think the author did a fantastic job. It's such a quick listen, but hard subject with characters that you can really connect to. Like, I really like this main character. She is not always likable, but you understand why she does the things she does and how she would be so conflicted. And it's about how you can look at a friend now and look back on your friendship and realize it was toxic and unhealthy, and that your friend is deeply flawed, and what she's doing right now is not right, but you have this personal connection to them. They were an important part of your life and you're really battling with those two things. I think that's an interesting conversation on top of everything else that is happening in terms of this wedding taking place on an old plantation and all the wedding guests, or the majority of them, having ancestors who have a connection to this plantation, to the slave owners, and all that kind of thing. So there's a lot of conversations happening in here, and I think this last 30% is really going to build up to something. So I'll come back when this is done and then I can wrap up this vlog, but I can tell you that this is one of my better experiences in horror ever. So I'm really liking this, and I really appreciate Hannah putting this on my radar. So I just finished When the Reckoning Comes, and I'm gonna give it 4 stars in the end. I don't think the ending went where I wanted it to go. I don't think that the people that I thought were gonna face the reckoning I thought they deserved. If you know, you know. But I do think the reckoning really came from within our main character, and her facing her own sense of anti-blackness, even though she's black herself, and really facing that within herself and confronting that within herself, which I think was well done. And I really liked her as the main character. I liked the love interest as well. I thought this writing was fantastic. This is an author I will definitely keep an eye on. Still want a copy for my shelves. Still really recommend it. I think it does some interesting things. I just don't think I would go into it expecting it to be your traditional horror, because that's not what this is. I do think this leans more literary, a little bit historical fiction, but I thought it was fantastic. It really fits into the kind of horror that I like, and I like literary mysteries, literary thrillers, so it would make sense that I would lean towards literary horror. So if you have any recommendations for books more like that, leave them in the comments, because I'm really excited to explore that genre more. So that wraps up this readathon. So how many books did I read? 5. I think my least favorite, sadly, was Gallows Hill, but I didn't dislike it. I actually enjoyed myself. I gave that 3 stars, and I will read more from Darcy Coates, but I want to try some of her shorter stuff first. I think that one was just too slow burn for me, and a character that I just couldn't get invested in, so I didn't really care what happened to her, but I loved the ending. I thought the ending was really fantastically done. And then the next one would probably be Fever Dream, though that is one that has stayed with me over the last few days, and I continue to think about and probably need to give a reread too. I love the way that that was told, and yeah, that one is one that will haunt you, and it's interesting. I've never read anything quite like it, and I will try more from the author. And then Final Girls by Mira Grant, which I also gave 4 stars and really liked, and I discovered last year reading Dead Silence that I do want to read more sci-fi horror, so it was nice to read another sci-fi horror, and I need to try more. And I think Mira Grant has a few more sci-fi horror books and novellas that I can try. I thought the conversation about using virtual reality for therapy was an interesting one. I didn't love like the twist that happened in the middle, but it was a really good read and a quick one. And then When the Reckoning Comes is my second favorite of the readathon. I think that is one, I just finished it like 5 minutes ago. So I do think that is one that I have to sit on and will grow on me. I find horror does that, because I think I said at the beginning of this vlog that I like my horror to have some kind of commentary, to be saying something, and that's what this does. And I think those kind of books you have to sit in for a bit. So I think that one will even grow on me more. And then my favorite, I don't think comes as a surprise, it was a 5-star prediction, I haven't seen a single bad review for it, is A Dowry of Blood. And I think we're getting a companion novel to that next year, which is really exciting. The writing is flowery, but in a way that makes so much sense for the story. I loved hearing from Jacqueline's Bride. I love this thing where you're writing a letter to somebody, the main character is telling their story through this kind of letter, and it's so compelling and memorable and just kind of beautiful in its horrifyingness, if that makes any sense. And yeah, so this was really successful. I don't want to read another horror for a minute. I know a lot of people read a lot more than 5 books over the weekend, but that was a lot of horror for me in one chunk of time. So I need to move on to some romance, or I think I'm going to read Clytemnestra next, some Greek myth stuff, some fantasy. I need something different, but I do love this genre. I realized that I love sci-fi horror, I love literary horror. Give me all your recommendations down below. I read 2 authors I've been meaning to read from for ages, who the co-hosts love, Darcy Coates and Mira Grant, and I will continue on with both of those authors. So I really can't complain. This was so much fun. There were so many sprints over the last 3 days, which I was just in awe of how long they were all sprinting. I could never. It's exhausting to sprint. I don't think you realize until you're on them how tiring that can be. So I'm in awe of that. and I look forward to the next one. This was so much fun. I need to do more readathons. So I hope you enjoyed this. Thanks again for your support. I'll talk to you again soon. Bye for now.